Next, we need to talk about reliability and flow control when we're talking about the TCP segments that we've been sending back and forth. Uh, there needs to be some resequencing of these segments. When services send data using TCP, the segments may arrive at their destination out of order. For the original message to be understood by the recipient, we've got to put the segments back in order. You wouldn't understand the message if it came in sections 1, 4, 7, 3, 2, 5, 10. So we need to put everything back in order as 1 through 10 so that it makes some sense. During session setup, an initial sequence number, the ISN, is set, and this ISN represents the starting value of the bytes for this session that's transmitted to the receiving application. And as data is transmitted during the session, that sequence number is incremented by the number of bytes that have been transmitted. And this data byte tracking enables each segment to be placed back in order. The segment sequence number enables the reliability by indicating how to reassemble and reorder received segments, as shown on the figure here to the right. The receiving TCP process places the data from a segment into a receiving buffer and kind of holds on until it gets all the information in there, and then it's going to put it back in order. Once all this information is received, it needs to be able to confirm the receipt of the segment. So one of the functions of TCP is ensuring that each segment reaches its destination. And again, remember with TCP we have a lot of overhead. So each segment is sent, and there's going to be a process that has to go along with each segment of the communication. The TCP services on the destination host acknowledges the data that it has received by the source application. Keep in mind we have our sequence number and our acknowledgement numbers, and they're used together to confirm the receipt of the bytes of data contained in the transmitted segments. The sequence number indicates the relative number of bytes that have been transmitted in the session, including the bytes in the current segment. The TCP uses the acknowledgement number sent back to the source to indicate the next byte that the receiver expects to receive. And this is called expectational acknowledgement. It says, yeah, I've gotten this many bytes, so send me the next one. So if I sent you 1 and I'm sending 10, it says, okay, I got the 10, so send me 11. Okay, so that's kind of how it's working back and forth. The source is informed that the destination has received all the bytes in the data stream up to but not including the byte indicated by the acknowledgement number. So the acknowledgement number says, hey, I need the next one starting at this point. Remember, each connection is actually a two-way session with the sequence and the acknowledgement numbers are being exchanged in both directions. Okay, and the example in this figure, the host on the left is sending data to the host on the right, and it sends a segment containing 10 bytes. Okay, that's what it says, hey, I need the 11th one back. And it's going to send that information back and forth. Now, we do occasionally have segment losses. Something could occur to where you don't get all 10 bytes or you don't get that segment altogether. So no matter how well the network is, data loss does occasionally occur, and the TCP provides methods of managing these segment losses. Among these is a mechanism to retransmit segments with an unacknowledged data. A destination host receiving service using TCP usually only acknowledges data for contiguous sequence bytes, like comes in order. If one or more segments are missing, only the data in the first contiguous sequence of bytes is acknowledged. For example, if segments with sequence number 1500 to 3000 and 3400 to 3500 were received, the acknowledgement number would be 3001. It's not going to take the 3400 because it's not contiguous or in order. So it's going to send it back and say, hey, I got this, but it's not going to acknowledge that it received the other part. And when TCPI at the source host has not received an acknowledgement after a predetermined amount of time, it returns the last acknowledged number received and retransmits the data from that point forward. And the retransmission process is not specified by the request for comments or the RFC, but is left up to the particular implementation of TCP. For a typical TCP implementation, a host may transmit a segment, put a copy of the segment in a retransmission queue, and start a timer. And when that data acknowledgement is received, the segment is deleted from the queue and the next one's placed out there. You can see this information here in this little diagram. It's going to show you how it hangs on to things in the queue. Once it receives it, it acknowledges it, sends it back, and it says, hey, I'm here. The timer stops, and it does it again. Okay. The host today may also employ an optional feature called selective acknowledgement. If both hosts support the selective acknowledgement, it's possible for the destination to acknowledge bytes in discontiguous segments, and the host would only need to retransmit the missing data. Next, with flow control, it's a mechanism that TCP provides, and the flow control helps maintain the reliability of the TCP transmission by adjusting the rate of data flow between the source and destination for any given session. And the flow control is accomplished by limiting the amount of data segments forwarded at one time, and by requiring acknowledgments of receipt prior to sending more. To establish the flow control, the first thing that TCP determines is the amount of data segments that the destination device can accept. And the TCP header includes a 16-bit field called the window size. And this is the number of bytes that the destination device of a TCP session is able to accept and process at one time. There's no need to send it more information than it can process, because then the information gets dropped and it's going to have to request it again. The initial window size is agreed upon during the session startup via that three-way handshake that we talked about earlier. And once agreed upon, the source device must limit the amount of data segments sent to the destination device based on the window size. And only after the source device receives an acknowledgement that the data segments have been received can it continue sending more data for the session. During a delay in receiving the acknowledgement, the sender does not send any additional segments. And in that period when the network is congested or the resources of the receiving host are strained, the delay may increase. As this delay grows longer, the effective transmission rate of the data for the session is decreased. So the slower it takes, the transmission rate of data is also going to decrease. And the slowdown in data transmission from each session helps reduce resource conflict on the network and destination device when multiple sessions are running. Because typically, think about it, you're doing more than one thing on your system at any given time. You'll notice in the figure to the right, it shows you a simplified representation of window size and acknowledgements. And in this example, the initial window size for the TCP session is 3,000 bytes. So it has sent the 3,000 bytes, it receives an acknowledgement, it says, hey, I got it, send me more, and it sends another 3,000 bytes, and then it requests more information. So the window size determines the number of bytes sent before an acknowledgement is accepted. And that's why the sender was able to send two sections or two sequences before it was looking for the acknowledgement. You can have the window sizes reduced. Another way to control that is to use a dynamic window size, and this is when a network resources are constrained, and TCPI can reduce the window size to require that the received segments by acknowledged be acknowledged more quickly. So if it's congested and things aren't getting there as quick, instead of sending 3,000 before it gets an acknowledgement, it may chunk it down to 1,500. So it's trying to help the flow of the network itself and making sure that the information is being received